Hi everyone, and welcome back to Stitches Past 5. My name is Vera, and today I'm going to talk about all the things you do and maybe more importantly that you don't need. A lot of people are starting, a lot of people have started or maybe started during the pandemic. It's really a big trend online, I find. I myself have been crocheting since I was like a very little girl, so it's I think around about 20 years now, and of course there's been years that I've crocheted more, there's been phases where I haven't really crocheted or I've crocheted less or where I've knitted instead, but I think I have a pretty good understanding of things that you do and maybe also the things that you don't need to buy right off the bat because yeah, like I said, there's just so much going on online, and today I'm here to help to try to get you an impression of the things that you need to buy. You're going to the craft store or you're online, you're ordering things, things you should be ordering and things you might just not need right off the bat, or you might not need ever, that really you can compensate or substitute with something else, or it's just things that in my opinion are just really purely marketing that you just don't need in general. So today I have three categories. The first category is the must-haves. So these are the things that without which you cannot crochet. So without these, like, you can't become a crocheter, you won't be able to create anything, and those are really your essentials. And I would say that this category is what you are looking for, what you want to acquire when you're first starting out. Then the next category are the good to have. So these are a few things that you might just not need right off the bat, but eventually when you're, getting into more intricate things, or when you just want to level up your crocheting a little bit, those are good to buy. And then the third categories are the don't need. So I know this is gonna be a little bit controversial, so just a disclaimer up front, this is my opinion, this is my experience. So if you can't live without one of these things on the don't need list, don't come at me, it's fine. I do without them, and I do just fine without them. Okay, so we're gonna start off with the must-have. So of course, the first one is a crochet hook. There are so many different crochet hooks out there, and I think when you're first starting off, it's okay to just buy like the cheapest crochet hook that you can find. This might also be controversial because some people will be like, no, go spend those 10, 20 euros, dollars, whatever, to get a good quality crochet hook. But I think first you're really starting to get into the motion. You're starting to learn how stitches work, like how maybe different stitches work. And I know that there's like sets on Amazon for very little money where you get like a bunch of different hook sizes. And I think when you're first starting out, that's totally fine. I'll show you some of the crochet hooks that I just have because I have them, but I don't necessarily use them anymore just because I have leveled up mine. So this is kind of what you're looking at then. Just your simple metal, they usually are, I guess, because that's the cheapest version. And they come in sets of like, I don't know, I think 2 millimeters to 10 millimeters often. Here is a bigger one, and I think these are fine because at the beginning you might not even know like which size you need, or you might not know which size yarn you prefer to work with. And I think for that, these needles are perfect because they let you just try it out, and they aren't gonna put a big hole in your wallet. They you can use them throughout and through. What I actually did is I made mine because the thin ones, I do find they're really hard to hold, especially when you're working on bigger projects. So what I did, I bought Fimo, which I'm not sure is available in Northern America, but here in Europe we do have it, and it's like you put it around. It's like modeling clay essentially. I'm sure you have different ones, and then you just bake it, and now I have a bigger handle and it's just a little bit more comfortable to hold. And the Fimo costs literally like 2 euros, and then you put it in the oven, you bake it, and then you have an ergonomic handle. So that's an option. I'm sure there's lots of DIY tutorials out there as well of how to do that. It's really simple. If you do want to spend a little bit more money, and if you say you want something that you're gonna want to hold and something that you're gonna want to work with more, but you are willing to spend just a little bit more money, then get something like this. This is an ergonomic crochet hook. Like you can see, it kind of curves out and it just lies in the hand a lot nicer. This one I actually got gifted to me This is by the company Prim, and I think these are really, like, if you go into any craft store, at least here where I live, Prim is really like the one that's all over. And yeah, I love these. These are plastic, so I think with time you will develop like a love for one material or another, and that's totally a personal preference. I don't mind plastic at all. I like plastic. I know some people don't like plastic. Some people prefer wood. Wood is, I haven't worked too much with wood because I don't personally like it, because sometimes I find the threads get caught on the wood a little bit. It depends on which one you prefer, I'd say. But to start with, you're totally fine with like just your cheap metal needle, like or hook, it's really fine. You don't need anything fancy. But then when you're ready to upgrade a little bit, this is a good option, or anything with an ergonomic handle. I think they make really cool crochet hooks out there these days, but that's nothing that you need right off the bat. With your hook size, if you're buying a set, it's not going to be a big of an issue, but if you're just looking to buy one crochet hook, then I would actually try to decide on the yarn that you want to use first, and then buy the crochet hook that's suggested on the yarn label. So for example, this one is just a basic cotton yarn, and it actually, when you read the label here, it suggests your size needle. So this one is a 4mm or US 6 needle, and then you can go to the shop, maybe ask someone to help you find that size needle if you already have a yarn, or if you just want to buy one hook. I think it's good to start with the yarn and then look for the hook that you want to use, because otherwise you're restricted about which yarn you want to use according to the size needle that you buy. That already brings me to the second thing that you obviously must have to crochet, and that is yarn. Again, the yarn market is huge, and there are thousands of things online of which yarn is the best. There's some brands that are like the hip brands, the cool brands, the high quality brands. I think a lot of it is also marketing. I think a lot of it is also your personal preference. I think when you're starting out, you're practicing. You're making sure that you're getting your stitches like even. You're making sure that you're getting, your single crochets. You want to get your chain just even, and you want to be able to, use your needle to get into the hole, to pull it through, and so on and so forth. So I think to start off with, just go for a basic yarn. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need anything expensive right off the bat, because this is your yarn that you're going to practice with. This is the yarn that you're going to make mistakes with, that you're going to unravel, and you don't want that to be an expensive yarn. Like, you don't need that to be your fanciest $10 skein of yarn that you bought at a craft fair. Like, it can be your 50-cent acrylic yarn, or it can be your grandma's leftovers. That's totally fine. Then of course the yarn world is very large, and there are plenty of resources online to help you choose the right yarn. But I think you start off with just buy a cheap one and practice. That's all it takes. Like, then you'll already have a feeling of what you might want next and what you might prefer. So that's your yarn. Then of course you will need scissors to cut your yarn. I sometimes, when I'm traveling and forget my scissors, I really hate it, because then you have to tear it, or you have to like tear up the separate like strands within the big strand, and it's just a pain. So just scissors, any scissors will do. If you really don't have scissors, just use a knife to cut yarn or whatever, but scissors are definitely a must, because otherwise you can't cut your yarn when you need to, and that's going to be an issue. And then the last one is your needles. So there's different needles, of course, depending on the width of yarn or size of yarn that you're using. These are some plastic needles that I have. So these are huge plastic needles. I also have some metal needles that are much smaller for thinner yarns. Again, I think it's the right path is to choose your yarn, then choose your crochet hook, and then get the needle that you need to sew in the ends. And that'll be fine. I know people that sew in ends with the crochet hook, but I think if you really like want a neat piece of work, then get a needle and sew it in properly with a needle, because with a hook you're just not, you're gonna be bothered. It's not gonna be a good time. So yeah, so the only 4 must-haves are crochet hook, scissors, yarn, and needles. And with those 4, you can already do so much. Like, you don't need to invest in a lot of these other things that I'm about to talk about, because with those 4 things, those are your essentials. Those are the things that you can theoretically even like knit a sweater with if you wanted to. It's gonna be maybe not the easiest time of your life, but it'll work. And those are really the 4 things that you need, and also the 4 things that I would recommend to you if you're really the purest beginner starting off. Yeah, so now the next category are the good to haves. These are items that you can live without, but you probably would rather not. These are things that I use most of the time when I'm crocheting, but I also say, okay, you could substitute it if maybe you're low on money, or maybe you just don't want to invest, or you just don't want that much stuff lying around for a hobby that you're not really sure that you'll keep yet. Okay, so the first good to have is a measuring tape. This is mine. I have the multicolored one. I think it's also from Prim actually, so that brand I mentioned earlier. Of course, any measuring tape will work. I think you can always use a measuring tape also in different aspects of life, not just for crocheting. And yeah, I think, of course, there's always the yarn and ruler method, but that was just a lot more prone to mistakes. And once you have a measuring tape, I think this cost me like €5. It just makes your life a lot easier. It can also like measure your body because it wraps around, and with yarn and ruler, that's gonna get very complicated. Or, I mean, I used a yarn and ruler for a long time as well. Like if I'm traveling, if I forget my tape or whatever, it works, but I think with a tape, your life is just a lot easier. Yeah, if you're making garments, like it's very important to know your proportions and maybe be able to follow the pattern according to your size or the size of the friend or whoever else you're making your garment for. And you'll need to be measuring things, and you'll also want to be measuring your gauge. Yes, you can use a ruler for your gauge, but I think might as well get a measuring tape. So this to me is a good to have. Okay, so the next good to have are stitch markers. Depending on what you want to make, you'll need a stitch marker sooner rather than later. And they look like this. So they're little like plastic, usually, sometimes they're metal things that you can kind of clip in like this. And essentially they mark the beginning of a round, or maybe where you need to like take something apart, or just indicate where you might want to use a different type of stitch. The pattern will always tell you like where a stitch marker needs to be placed. So yeah, these are super useful. I only actually ever bought 1 box of stitch markers, and they've lasted me for years. I think it's because I just don't really lose them. I always put them back in my little box. I put them as a good to have just because you can also substitute them. So in my box of stitch markers, I also keep a lot of safety pins because they work just the same. They're just a little more cumbersome to put on and take out, but they serve the same function. And I think if you already have a handful of safety pins at home, you might as well just use those first. And if you're really, really bothered by like opening them and closing them to like take them on and off, or put them on and off, you can use your safety pins the same way, and that's fine. Paper clips also work. People use hair elastics. I've also used, once I didn't have my stitch markers with me, I just tied like little rounds of string, and I was on a knitting project, so that works pretty well because you just slip them over. With crocheting, you do need something that opens and closes just because it hooks into your work. But paper clips, anything that will fasten, that won't come out when you're moving your work around, will do. Stitch markers are pretty inexpensive, I think, and yeah, I have them in 2 colors, which helps because then you can mark different parts of your projects. But again, if you're a beginner and you're really just practicing, or you're making simple things, you don't usually need stitch markers anyways, but if you do need them, then just use safety pins or yeah, paper clips. But if you want to spend those extra few euros, go ahead, buy your stitch markers. Okay, so the last thing I have in the good to have category is something that I know is going to be controversial, but another good to have is, or for me, is textile glue. This is something that I use because I get nervous when I sew my ends in that they'll come back out. And especially if I'm making something wearable, I always sew in my ends, and then I cut them off nice and short, and then I put a tiny dot of textile glue to sew to glue them down. So to me, it's a good to have because I just like I feel so much safer with this because I think when I'm wearing something like handmade, when I'm out, I'm always just like a little bit conscious of like, is something coming undone? But like with this, I don't have that feeling. So it's just nice to have. Of course, you don't need it because I think it is something that just comes later when you're making garments, when you're making things that get used. And yeah, so for me, I love this. I use it a lot. I use it even when I'm making a granny square that I know I'll use to not just look at, or if I'm making like a little pouch or something, I go in with this textile glue and like glue it all down just for peace of mind. I think textile glue is a little bit more expensive. Like I think for this small tube, I paid like €7. To me, it's worth it. If it's not something that you think you'll need, you definitely don't need it, but I think it definitely gives me a lot of peace of mind just because, yeah, I get a little bit nervous when I know that maybe I didn't sew my ends right because I was rushing to finish a project, and we've all been there. So yeah, that's the textile glue. All right, so those were the must-haves and the good-to-haves. Now I'm gonna get to my things that you do not need list, which is quite long. I think a lot of these come from these crochet influencers that have everything like super neatly together, that probably have like a yarn closet and have like, I don't know, I've seen yarn pantries, and I live in a small apartment. I just don't have that sort of space. So I keep my crochet things to a minimal. Of course, I have a lot of yarn lying around, but I think with equipment, I really try to keep it like to one little box that I have. Some of these things I do have and I've learned that I maybe don't need, or some of these things I have because I use them for specific things that I make, but that doesn't mean that you need those things unless you're making that specific thing. So the first one that relates to that is actually safety eyes. So a lot of people who make plushies, who make amigurumis, use these. I bought a box. They're not too expensive. I think this cost me €7 or €8 off of Amazon. And I just like the way safety eyes look on the plushies. Like I like when I'm making, here's a little penguin I made. So I like that when I'm making a little plushie, I can just pop in the eyes and secure them. I usually go in with super glue, which is also of course something that you don't necessarily need, but if I'm gifting it to someone, I want to make sure it's safe. I just like the way it looks, but you can 100% substitute that with like a black yarn or some embroidery yarn. Or something. So it's definitely not something that you need. I have them and I use them, and that's why I like having them, right? But when you're just starting out, and if you're just trying to get the feel of how to make amigurumi or how, you know, the whole construction of something like that works, you don't need to go out and buy your safety eyes right away. Embroidering in your eyes will work just fine, and yeah, you'll live just fine without your safety eyes. The next one is a crochet hook organizer. So sometimes I do spend time online, and I see all these things where I'm like, oh, I just don't need to spend my money on this. And that's one of those things that's like, I don't have it, so I can't show it to you, but I'll try to put in a picture. It's like a pencil case that like folds out for all your crochet hooks. And sure, it's maybe nice for the people that use it. I just don't find that that's necessary. Right now, and this might be the other end of the spectrum, but I keep my hooks like in a small little IKEA bag. It's fine. Like I don't need to choose or switch my hooks that often because one project usually involves like one, maybe two different sizes of hooks. So I just don't have the need to have 20 hooks laid out in front of me at all time. My knitting hooks, and of course I could also keep my crochet hooks in here, I keep in like this nice little wooden box that actually my grandpa like handmade. So all my knitting needles are in here. I have another one where I keep, I think, just larger needles, and these stack up and they just kind of live underneath my sofa. And yeah, they're all in here. They're small, and yeah, like I said, I already had these boxes. I found it was a pretty good use. Actually, this one already says knitting needles in German on top of them because this is my grandma's old one that my grandpa made for her. Yeah, so you don't need a crochet hook organizer. Any bag will do, trust me. You'll be just fine without it. Okay, the next one is gonna be controversial because I I have a hard time with this. So crochet stitch or crochet pattern books. I don't think you need them, to be honest, right at the beginning, especially because, of course, if you have a big shelf and if you want to display all your beautiful crochet and knitting or whatever crafting books, go for it. I think right now it's a really cool time because everything is online. Like any pattern or any tutorial that you will need, you'll find online. So you don't really need to spend like 20, 30, maybe even 40 euros, dollars on a crochet pattern book. I'm not saying don't go support these authors. I think they're awesome and they're amazing. I've bought the books before and I buy them digitally just so I don't have that much stuff lying around, and that works just fine because then I can actually write onto it. Like with my iPad, I write notes onto the patterns, maybe alterations that I've made, and that works just fine for me. I think, yeah, there's so many cool free patterns online as well that if you're starting out, I think this is somewhere you can save money. Like don't spend all this money on all these patterns. Of course, if there's a cool pattern online, go buy it. I think that's an awesome way to also support other creators. But I think also, yeah, to just start learning it, to start getting into it, find those free patterns and make them and maybe alter them a little bit. That's how you kind of start understanding how the stitches work, how fitting works, and all those things. But I think right off the start, crochet pattern books, maybe not necessary. I think they're nice to gift, they're nice to receive as a gift. I think they look cute on your shelf, but to me, it's not something that I want to be investing my money in currently. Okay, then the next one, also, yeah, controversial, I guess, are crochet project bags or just project bags. Essentially, these are bags that makers sell to keep your crochet project while you're making it, to keep it tucked away, to keep all the yarns together, and just to keep your needle inside the bag. And I think that's an important thing. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a great concept. I just don't think you need a specific bag to keep your project in. I think you can use anything. You can use your big Ziploc whatever bag. You can use a tote bag that you already have lying around. You can make your own crochet project bag, but I just don't think it's something that you need to spend a lot of money on right at the beginning, or truly ever. Like, I don't think I've ever bought a crochet project bag, in all honesty. I've made my own, or I use tote bags, but I don't want to spend money on that because it's just more stuff lying around. And then I find that some people also just have stacks of project bags, but not even enough projects to go into the bags. I'm someone who likes to start a project and then finish a project. I sure have a few whips or works in progress lying around, but I do try to finish them, and therefore I just don't think I need project bags. I don't think you need project bags. Use whatever bag you have lying around. I'm sure you have some bags somewhere in the house or in the apartment lying around that you could use to store your works in progress and the yarns that go with it. The next one that I've never owned, never understood why people need them, and maybe that's just my opinion, and that's a row counter. They're little, like, I'll try to put a picture in. They're little things that I guess you even clip onto your work sometimes, or you just keep somewhere and then you press it every time you hit the row. Maybe I just don't count my rows normally because I measure my work. Like when I'm making a sweater, I'm not gonna be counting my rows. I'm gonna be like measuring, like, because my swatch might be a little bit, or my gauge might be a little bit different. I once downloaded a row counter on my phone, never used it, saw it online, thought I needed it, just didn't want to buy it. So I was like, okay, let's try this on my phone. Literally never needed it, never, like, forgot to count the second, third row right after I like clicked the first one. I just doesn't work for me. I think if you're thinking of buying one, like, download something on your phone first where you can tap it every time you reach the end of a row. I mean, I've been crocheting for like 20 years now, and I've never once been like, oh, I need a row counter. So I'm gonna say that's something that you also you don't need. Yeah, the next one is a blocking mat, and this one I don't own. I use different things. I think online you have these videos, you have these pictures of people like putting pins into their blocked granny squares. I've just personally never needed to do that. Like, I do the blocking and If you don't know what blocking is, it's essentially when you're first creating something, you want to relax the stitches and then you put it into water or you steam it to kind of relax the stitches into each other, and that's called blocking. So then of course you end up with a wet piece of clothing or item or whatever, and then you need to dry it flat. And people have these blocking mats where they lie their clothes on and you can kind of like pin it into shape. What works for me is I have a tile floor in my bathroom and I'll lie it on there. I have floor heating as well, so in the winter I'll turn that on a little bit, lie it on there, and then just like place it into shape. If it doesn't stay in shape, I'll place like a heavy item onto it to just kind of lie it into shape, and that works just fine for me. I don't need a blocking mat. I don't even know where I would keep a blocking mat in all honesty, in my apartment, and I don't know if I would use it if I had it, because I've never really thought, oh, I need a blocking mat today. Yeah. Then the next one is a yarn bowl. I think these are cute. Like, I've seen them. I don't even use a center pole usually, so people swear by center poles. Center poles where you take the string out of the middle of the yarn and then it just like doesn't bounce around. I don't have an issue with organizing my yarn like every 20 minutes if I'm making a project. I've never really needed a yarn bowl. Like, people have these nice ceramic bowls where there's like a little thing to put your yarn through so your yarn doesn't run away. I think it's cute. I think it's like aesthetically pleasing, but I wouldn't say it's something that you need. And I think on the side of, I don't want to call it like, I'm not going to call myself a minimalist crocheter, because I do have stuff and that I do use, and I don't just have like 2 crochet hooks and that's it. But on the side of like more minimalistic crocheting, I don't think you need a yarn bowl. Like, it's just gonna stand around, it's gonna lie around, and like honestly at this point most of my projects have like 2 or 3 balls of yarn attached to them, so like I'm not gonna set up a full table of dishes so I can start crocheting. That's just not me. If you think it's cute, if you want to use one, go ahead and use one. I just don't think you necessarily need one. You'll survive without a yarn bowl. Okay, and then the last one that I really don't think you need is a swatch ruler. Again, this one you see online. It's essentially this thing that's like a square that has like your measurements here and your measurements here, and most patterns require you to take a 10 by 10 centimeter or 4 by 4 inch swatch before you start, so that you know that your stitch number matches the one in the pattern, so the size turns out the same. And they have these squares that you like lie on top of your swatch to get your gauge. I can move my ruler, like I can just measure it this way and then measure it this way, and that works just fine for me. I don't feel the need to buy another item that will do that for me. I never felt like I needed one. I think people use them because it's easier. But I think even if you have your measuring tape, you lie it this way, you measure your 10 centimeters, which funnily enough is actually the red, like it stops after 10, the red fun. And then you measure it this way, and then you count your rows and your number of stitches. So like, I don't know, I can move a ruler. I don't need something that's already there. So yeah, I just use my measuring tape or a ruler that I keep in my pencil case. Alrighty, so that is my wrap up of things that I think you must have, maybe is good to have, and definitely don't need. I know that some people have very different opinions of these, so I'm curious, like, let me know which ones that you swear by that maybe I don't need, or maybe the ones that I say are good to have that you're like, no, I don't need that, because it really varies. And I think the must-haves, I think most people will agree with me that those are the things, if you're a new crocheter and you're walking into the shop for the very first time to start your crocheting, those are the things that you need. But the rest will come over time. I think you'll figure it out, what you need, what you don't need. And I will definitely recommend to you that, like, don't buy something just because some influencer, some Instagrammer told you so, or because they're told you, or because it's looking nice on their feed. Like, that's just not the healthiest spending habits. And I think, yeah, while it's beautiful and nice, and I love looking at those feeds too, like, but I also just know that that's not the crocheter that I'll ever be, because A, I don't have the space for it, and B, I just want to crochet and I don't want to make this whole beautiful aesthetic thing out of it. And yeah, I think it's often easy to fall into that thing. I was like, oh, I need to be filmed like winding my yarn before I start using it. It's like, no, you don't. You can just start using your yarn. The world will not end. You will be just fine. So yeah, that's my tip for you. Don't kind of fall into those traps, or at least before you do buy something because you saw it online somewhere, like ask yourself, will I use it? Will I need it? Can I use something else? It's worked for me, and I'm sure it'll work for you as well. It's really not that big of a deal, and not something that you need to spend all your savings on. It's just a nice little hobby on the side, I guess. Yeah, so those are my 2 cents. Let me know if you disagree. I'm sure some of you will, but that's okay. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'd love for you to subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.